Alright folks, thank you very much for coming along to our talk with Mr Nesbitt, leader of the Ulster Unionist Party and Minister of Health here in Northern Ireland. It's a pleasure to see you all here. Just a quick reminder that we have our social event tomorrow, the Uele Pule one for Victim Support in Eye, so please do come along for that, help raise some money for charity. We have our weekly debates as well every Thursday. This house would not have children this week, so a bit of an interesting one. Probably a little bit health related as well. So thank you so much for coming along. Thank you, Minister, for agreeing to come talk to the Society. It's really important that we have public figures like yourself coming to speak to students. After all, we're all the voters of today and tomorrow, so it's your chance to pitch yourself to the future electorate. So I suppose we'll let that, Minister, if you'd like to make some opening remarks. Okay. Thank you.
I'm guessing I don't need the microphone because the projector bit. Is that okay? Everybody can hear okay? Well, listen, thank you very much, and apologies. I think we've been backwards and forwards to try and get this to happen. I know literific is a mixture of the literary and the scientific, and that's probably where I find myself now, because my background would be on the arts side of things. My primary degree was English literature. But now I find myself as Minister for Health diving quite deep into a lot of really scientific stuff that I don't necessarily understand. I don't need to understand in any great detail, but I need to be able to articulate and understand what the clinicians and the other scientists who are working in health have to tell me. Politics particularly in this country where we have this mandatory coalition of sometimes 4, sometimes 5 parties, it's a strange way to do business. So on the 28th of May last, at 2 minutes to midnight, I was a backbench member of the Legislative Assembly at Stormont. I had an office in Newton Ards, which is my constituency of Strangford, where I employed 3 people, 2 part-time, so it was 2 whole-time equivalent staff, with a budget I think was about 150, 160k. At 1 minute to midnight, I became Minister of Health and was therefore responsible for around about 70,000 people who deliver healthcare, and a budget which currently sits at £8.4 billion. There is no other walk of life where that would happen. And I got to be Minister of Health because the Ulster Unionist Party decided to go in to the executive after the last election. And our vote entitled us to just 1 ministry, which we didn't get to pick. Because Sinn Féin were the largest party, so they got the first pick. DUP were the second largest party, they got the second pick. And then we follow on by this process called the Hunt, who is a mathematician who gave us a formula which is based on the number of votes you get. That represents the number of seats that you get in the executive and the order in which they get picked. So we were quite far down the running order, but health was still available and we took it. And Robin Swan went in ahead of me. But I sometimes liken it to, if you were building a house, would you say to the roofer, I want you to do the brickwork? Would you say to the brickie, you're doing the plumbing? Because it's a little bit like that. At no point, particularly as you go down the list, you're not saying, of the 90 MLAs, who is the best qualified to be the Minister of Education? Who is the best qualified to be the Minister of Agriculture, the Environment and Rural Affairs, or the Minister of Health? And indeed, when I started at Stormont, education and the economy were the 2 areas where I felt comfortable and where I could make a contribution. And health, probably in fairness, wasn't one of them. Certainly agriculture wasn't, because I had no background, I didn't know any farmers, I've always lived in urban areas like East Belfast. So depending on your background, you get a portfolio that you are either comfortable with or it's almost alien to you, and you have to learn how to do it. So the way we do politics is what I'm saying is just really, really strange. I have on my shelf in the ministerial office of the Castle Buildings 2 quotes, so I'll go on the literary side of literature here. And one is a very simple one from a Russian writer called Ivan Turgenev. And he says, if we wait for the moment when everything, absolutely everything is ready, we shall never begin. And I think that is so true of a lot of things in life, not least the politics of Stormont. I heard a minister once some years ago being harassed by the media about why haven't you made the decision yet on a particular issue? And the minister said, well, it's a really, really important issue and we have to take the time to make the right decision. And I thought, there's no such thing as the right decision. You have a series of options here. None of them is perfect. All of them has a downside. And what you have to do as a minister is pick the one that you think is the best of the bunch and then manage and mitigate the downside. So one of the reasons I think we're relatively slow in terms of politics is we tend to wait for the time when absolutely everything is ready. And those times don't exist. And the other quote I have is kind of relevant to my time as a victims commissioner, because I helped set up the commission for the victims of the 30-year conflict that we had here, the thing we so euphemistically call our troubles. And it was a passage from Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and I'll not quote it in full because it's long and I wouldn't remember it. But basically what he says is, in everybody's life there is what he calls a memorable day. And that's a day that sets the direction of travel for the rest of your life. And the analogy he uses is it wraps you in a chain. And if your memorable day is a positive and a good one, you'll be in a chain of gold and roses. But if it's a bad day, you'll be wrapped in a chain of thorns and base metal. And to me, the story of the conflict out there for the 30 years between the late 60s and peace in the 90s was thousands of our citizens having memorable days that wrapped them in chains of thorns and of base metal. And part of the problem is when that person passes on, the chain doesn't disappear, it doesn't get buried with them. It tends to get handed on intergenerationally to their children and then their grandchildren and now their great-grandchildren. And one of the big challenges politically is how do we intervene and try and lighten the load that chain represents. And one of the biggest, probably the biggest single legacy is poor mental health. And our rates per capita per mental health in Northern Ireland are way bigger than anybody else's. And that's because of that legacy factor of people who got wrapped in chains or whose father, grandfather or great-grandfather got wrapped in the chain that is now affecting their life. So I was asked to speak for about 10 minutes. I think that's me done. So over to you.
Thank you very much for being here. As Dermot has previously said, and just for giving up your time to engage with students in this way. Great to have you here. I'm just going to dive straight into the questions then. The talk started about, I suppose, an earlier stage in your life, first of all. Commenting on your experience as an undergraduate student at Cambridge, you said most people, especially from the southeast of England, didn't know much about people from Northern Ireland and found us at best peculiar. Was being a student, in England at, I suppose, a turbulent time in Northern Ireland's history, was that an isolating experience, not least in the wake of the Guildford and Birmingham pub bombings? Can you tell me a bit about kind of how that experience was?
So my years were 76 to 1979. And yeah, so one time I was actually in London near Oxford Circus. One of those big department stores which has glass from here, up beyond that wooden ledge. And there was a ball scare. And with sirens and police cars and whatnot running around the streets. And I could see through the glass there was a woman dressing a mannequin. And she clearly wasn't aware that there was a bomb scare. And I thought, I don't know if that goes off the glass. So I went into the store and I went up to somebody behind the counter and said, excuse me, do you know there's a bomb scare outside and your colleague is in the window? And she she lived in, she wrote, "Oh my God, thanks so much." And she started to walk to tell her friend, her colleague, and then she just stopped. Because obviously my Belfast accent had just dropped. And she turned around and she glared at me. So that's the way it was. And nobody was asking me, you're probably a Catholic, unionist, or nationalist. That guy's from Belfast, Northern Ireland. It's a really horrible place. Our soldiers are going over there and they're getting murdered. So just watch them. And so for the first year, whether it was in the changing rooms for a sports match, in the lecture theatre, in the college bar, there was a lot of just back off that. And it took about a year to establish a kind of small circle of friends. And then it was much more comfortable, but still out and about, going shopping or whatever, you still had that kind of.
Do you think any of those attitudes of suspicion or even, I suppose, indifference live on when you think about kind of sometimes fraught tensions between the Westminster government and unionism here?
Yeah, I think that politically we've made a mistake which we have repeated down the years, which is every time we have failed to manage our books, and you can argue, by the way, that the block grant was never enough. But when things go badly wrong, what we tend to do is we run to Westminster with the begging bowl, and they've had enough. And the kind of tipping point was the renewable heat incentive scandal a few years ago. Is everybody familiar with that? So, you had the DUP people saying, mistakenly saying, this isn't block grant money, this is out of the other pot of money called annual managed expenditure, which would, for example, pay for your student loans and whatnot. And benefits is the big thing. So AMI is an expandable pot of money, it's not a fixed sum, and it doesn't affect the block grant. So the DUP's attitude was, in that case, fill your boots. It's free money. Now, in Treasury, they were just waiting for that kind of excuse to go to their political masters, to my mind, and say, look, we told you those people, those politicians in Northern Ireland, effectively are wasters and they can't manage money, stop giving them money. So you would have heard Hilary Benn, the Secretary of State today, who was being very hardline about you don't need money to transform your public services, you just need the will to do it. I don't agree with them. I think we're struggling to maintain the services and health that we have with our existing budget, and you can't do transformation unless you fund it. But that's the position that we're in. So, if you went, particularly around England, I think, and you started saying to people, we give Northern Ireland a block grant of, say, £15 billion a year. That would build an acute hospital in your constituency. That would put bobbies on your beat in your constituency. That would put classroom assistants in the schools that your voters attend. Do you still want to give Northern Ireland $15 billion a year? Because remember, half of them don't even want to be part of the club. Then there's an existential threat to Northern Ireland's place in the UK.
Right, we'll get into conversations about health and wider unionism, I'm sure, as the interview goes on, but broadcasting was initially your career of choice, and I believe you were a sports presenter at the BBC, anchored Good Morning Ulster. Why did you pick journalism rather than politics at that stage, and also do you think anybody now questions your impartiality as a broadcaster in light of then your unionist career now?
Well, once I stood back in 2010 for the Ulster Unionist Party, yes, a few people, particularly in Sinn Féin, said, "Oh my goodness, I always knew he was." But actually, particularly at UTV, the 13 years I spent at UTV, there was a thing called the Pink, which was just an A4 page, and the sheet happened to be pink. So if you phoned in, the receptionist would get a Pink, and they would invite you, do you want to give your name, address, phone number, do you want us to call back? You didn't, you could say no, anonymous. And all those Thursday nights when they did the half-hour political programmes, the half-hour debates, we would go down afterwards to reception and we'd say, "Can we see the Pinks?" And normally there was an equal pile of pinks here and pinks here, and these were saying I was an orange bee, and these were saying I was a bee. So I was sort of comfortable while I was doing it. And in fact, my sister-in-law quite early on said, I was speaking to a good friend, and my good friend said to me, I'm so sorry for your sister being married to that F-E-N-I-A-N. So, you know, I believe I was pretty neutral. But being a broadcaster was not my first choice career. My grandfather started a linen business in the centre of Belfast many, many years ago, handed it on to his 2 children. And I was supposed to be the 3rd generation to become the owner, managing director of Alfred Nesbitt & Co. linen manufacturers. But on the 25th of January 1973, the IRA blew it up. And for a lot of reasons I needn't go into, Dad and Uncle Jack couldn't get it going again, so that career path was cut off to me. So when I got back from uni, I came here for a year's postgrad because I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I was effectively buying time. And I saw the local sports results one Saturday afternoon at the end of a program called Grandstand. And this guy, the presenter, he said, well, I was at Linfield Glentoran, here's my report. And then he was reading out reports on all the other fixtures that had happened that day, and I thought, I'd like to write one of those. So I contacted the BBC Sports Department, they phoned me back and they said, you can't write a report unless you're in the National Union of Journalists. And I said, I'll join. And they said, no, you won't, because you can't join the National Union of Journalists unless you earn, I think it was 70% of your income from journalism. And I said, but that's catch-22. And she said, yeah, it is. But you can broadcast on the radio. And I never actually wanted to be a broadcaster. But it was the only route, and I thought, what the hell, I'll give it a go. So that's how it started.
Yeah, and you were obviously became a broadcaster, and now you're health minister, so you've moved on to that, political career and that portfolio. Just going to kind of discuss that in more depth now. In commenting previous to Christmas on pressures the NHS may face, Chair of the BMA, Dr. Alan Stout, said at that stage, what we really need are medium and long-term plans to significantly reignite the planning and funding of our services. In light of comments, following Christmas from, I suppose, that peak flu season in January, such as the Vice Chair of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine saying it was impossible to manage the number of patients arriving into emergency departments and that it was the worst we've ever been. These winter pressures happen every year. How could we have been more prepared for that, and why weren't those things in place?
Okay.
And surely that was able to be, predicted.
Yeah, well, first of all, I now talk about additional winter pressures rather than winter pressures, because it's clear that the pressures on emergency departments happen 365 days a year. So they're already well strained when something like that winter flu comes along. And the problem is the flow. So the problem isn't the emergency department. That is simply where the problem comes to light, where it manifests itself. So it's all about the flow between getting people out of ambulances into ED, getting people out of ED into a bed, and the big problem this winter was getting people out of the beds and out of the back door of the hospital, either into a care home or giving them a domiciliary package. And like with a lot of stuff in healthcare, it then becomes incredibly complicated, where you break down the 500 odd people who were in our acute hospitals every day over Christmas and the New Year, who were medically fit for discharge but were still in bed. So, some were there because there wasn't a care home bed. Some were there because although they needed a care home bed and there was one available to them, it was the wrong type of bed because they maybe needed a dementia bed and there's more wraparound services for that. Or maybe there was a bed for them, but it wasn't in their first choice care home. And the family were saying, no, we're not doing it, we're not moving them even temporarily because we're frightened if we move them temporarily it becomes permanent.
So was that the reform that was needed within the health service before Christmas to allow those people to access those beds, in preparation for that season? Well,
you do need a medium to long-term solution, and part of it is more capacity in the community, and that's both in terms of care home beds and also people working in social work, who can provide those domiciliary, those home packages. The people who may be called 1, 2, 3, 4 times a day with somebody because they need dressed, undressed, fed, toileted. So you can't click your fingers and create another 1,000 social workers. So what Robin Swan did before me was he put another 70 million into social care here. And what I've said I will do this calendar year is introduce the real living wage. So at the moment, if you were a care worker, you will be paid £20.01 an hour. You don't get to travel. So if you're driving your car, particularly if you're working rural, you're driving big mileage, you're not getting money back for it. You know, running a car is expensive. So I will get the wage up to a good £23 an hour, which should make it more attractive. So we should be able to attract more in and retain more, because people come in and think, this isn't for me, doesn't pay, so I'm going to leave.
Is it money though, or is it reform that's needed? Because that seems to be what the Secretary of State is saying, that it's, you know, an overhaul of the system.
Well,
so which, in your opinion, is it?
Yeah. Well, it's a bit of both, but it's a shift left, as we call it. So if you think that, you know, your home is here and the acute hospital is out to the right here, a huge amount of the money goes out right into the acute hospitals, because that's where all the really expensive stuff happens. Over here, you've got GP practices near your home, you've got community practice, you've got social care near your home. So shifting left is saying, in an ideal world, if you need healthcare, you get it at home. And if you can't get it at home, as close to home as possible, i.e. in a GP surgery, a community setting, you get social care looking after you. And the further you go towards the acute hospital, the worse it is. So the second worst outcome is if you have to go to an acute hospital for your healthcare. And the worst outcome is having to go to an acute hospital and stay overnight. And who wants to do that? So the trick is to try and take some of the pressure off the hospitals and release some of the money that goes in the expensive stuff and pump it left, so that you've got more social workers, you've got more community workers, you've got more GPs.
You have cited budget constraints in the past, you know, within the executive as hindering you from, you know, carrying out your brief. Do you still feel that way?
Yes, I do, because, for example, we're coming towards the end of the financial year, at the end of next month. Nurses and doctors get pay rises awarded independently by assessment bodies based over in GB in London. And they normally make their recommendations about June time. So for this financial year, about June time, they were saying give nurses 5.5%. Here we are on the 4th of February, they still haven't got it. And I have been scraping and, you know, borrowing and stealing and looking down sofas, and I've still only got 11 of the 12 months. Now, they will get the 12 months one way or another, but it is not right that a nurse who was told 6 and 7 or 8 months ago, you deserve 5.5% of a pay rise, still hasn't got it.
How can you credibly remain part of an executive that you feel you can't actually deliver on those key issues? How does that change?
Well, I don't think if I walked away and somebody else took the role that would make any difference. I feel I have to stay in, accept the responsibility that was given to me back on the 29th of May, and try and do the job and argue it around the executive table. And in fairness, the budget position, the opening budget position, which was very bad, has been improved by 2 big lumps of money coming in these so-called monitoring rounds, where in June, particularly in October, Health got hundreds of millions, which got us it got us from, say, being able to pay 6 months of pay to 11 months. And now that we come to the end of the year, things will happen, like a trust will say, well, look, we had 20 million quid for really high cost drugs, we've only used 15, the demand's only been 15 million, there's 5 million now. And by the time we gather in all that stuff, I'm pretty confident we'll be able to do the pay.
Is criticism of the executive arguably better coming from the position of opposition?
Oh yes, it is, yeah. And I formed the first official opposition in 2016 alongside the SDLP. And arguably, we were way too successful, because if you take out summer recess, that executive collapsed by January of 2017. When we left the DUP and Sinn Féin eyeballing each other around that round executive table. And Claire Dickson was there as Justice Minister, but there were only two political parties who, at that point, didn't agree on very much, and just couldn't get on. And by January, it collapsed. So I think an opposition is healthy. It's not about collapsing things. It's about saying, when it comes to election time, as happens in any democracy, if you think that your government has done well over the last 4 or 5 years, well, then give them another go. But if you don't, give the opposition a try.
There was dialogue around the time when your party was deciding whether to go into the executive or not, you know, about that was quite the decision for your party. You know, why did you choose to go into the executive? And I suppose what I'm really asking is it helpful for you to be criticising allocation exercises, you know, the budget? Do you feel that sort of that would be more effective criticism if you were sitting in opposition?
No, I don't actually, because I don't think the SDLP are making much of a mark as the opposition at the moment. I mean, they're making a lot of noise. Some of the points they make are probably reasonable, but it's not having an impact on how the executive is delivering government. So again, one of the kind of strange things, as well as, you know, the roofers doing the plumbing. In the executive table, we're working pretty collegiately together around the table, because we all recognise everybody's got financial and other issues to deal with. But then when you go into the debating chamber on Monday and Tuesday, the parties of government are acting as if they're all in opposition to each other, which is a point the SDLP make repeatedly during the debates. You know, you're having to go at each other, and yet you're in government together.
So I'm just going to move it on to women's health. Northern Ireland doesn't currently have a dedicated women's health strategy. Waiting times for chronic illnesses impacting women, such as endometriosis, are amongst the worst in the UK. You faced criticism in the past from Fermanagh and Omagh district councillors over your commitment to addressing women's health issues. How can we be convinced that you as a health minister takes women's health issues seriously and is going to do, you know, work on that? Because if he's, as you've cited before, budget constraints could feed into that. So how can we be sure that that's something you're prioritising in light of how we compare with the rest of the UK?
Yeah, I think that the main criticism is that I've said that I will not be commissioning a women's health strategy. But the reason for that is it takes a long time, first of all, but there isn't necessarily the budget to deliver it. So we've got a cancer strategy and we've got a mental health strategy, and the mental health strategy was, although it was Robin Swan's time, I've always campaigned on mental health because of the troubles. So when Robin became the minister, I said, we have to have a mental health champion, so that's Professor Siobhan O'Neill. We'll have to have a strategy. It's a wonderful strategy. It's a 10-year strategy, but it has an action plan for this year, which says we need to spend £42 million to do all the actions. We've got 5.9 million. So it's almost thankless, it's almost cruel to say, here's what it should be, but this is all you're getting. And next year, for the mental health strategy, it'll be worse. So I don't want to do, here is, for the first time ever, a women's health strategy, isn't that brilliant? But then to say, well, we can't action it. So what I've asked for is a women's health action plan, which of course will be more modest, but it will be funded. So at least when we say we're going to just do A, B, C, D, and E rather than the full alphabet of operations, at least A, B, C, D, and E should happen because there's the money to make it happen. And that will inform the strategy when it eventually comes.
Arguably with those waiting lists, you know, in the situation they are, that could be time we don't really have to get that in place. Does it look good for you as a unionist to be unable in your portfolio to have the funding to actually put that in place in a timely manner? How are you going to sell remaining in the union when I suppose the sell has been for so long the thriving NHS that we're a part of?
Yeah.
How are you going to sort of weigh those up?
I tend to park the party political hat when I leave the house in the morning to go to the health department. But yes, it is a point. And you know, we used to worry about losing doctors and nurses to Australia. We now worry about losing them to Athlone, because Sláintecare does not have financial worries, budgetary worries, and they pay a lot better. And when you think about the developments, even in infrastructure here, you know, in my day, if we left here to go to Dublin, it'd be maybe a 3.5 hour drive. Get there in 2 hours now. So, and so particularly the area you live to the border, the more attractive Sláintecare is, because you know, it might be an hour's drive, and you're getting a salary that is maybe 50, 60, 70% above what we can offer. So, yeah, the use of the National Health Service as the jewel in the crown that defends the union, you have to say that that is to some extent weak. But then if you go down south, you do pay.
So why would you sell the NHS in its current state in Northern Ireland as a unionist?
Well, I would say it is still a service where if you really need it, it is there for you. I understand, having been a journalist, that you're not going to switch on your radio at 7 o'clock in the morning and say, hey, guess what? 1,000 operations conducted yesterday, 999 brilliantly successful. One's a bit of a problem. The headline's going to be one's a problem.
I'm just going to bring you on to another sort of topic of interest at the minute in the wider UK. Northern Ireland's the only region in the UK not to have begun a serious political debate on assisted dying, despite 2/3 of the population here expressing support for legislation. Now, the chair of My Death, My Decision has said the introduction of the Choice at the End of Life Bill for England and Wales brings into sharp focus a lack of political engagement on the issue in Northern Ireland. Is that an issue you plan to make progress on in the near future?
The department has no plans to introduce legislation to change the current situation, which is that to assist somebody to take their own life is a crime. And I've only got 2 years left on the mandate, and I'm afraid it's not going to be a priority.
Arguably, though, if the dialogue is starting, campaigns are running, it's an issue in the wider UK, people may be asking questions about your view on that. Are you going to give one?
I've just given it. It's a crime, and we're not intending to legislate. It's going to
there'll be no dialogue happening about that? No debate?
Well, I can't stop debate, and I would welcome debate, but I'm not going to be leading a debate.
Would you be part of it?
I think, probably have to be. And I'm not in a position to give a view because I haven't done enough research into it.
Okay. So, just going to move on to your career then in political unionism. When you resigned from leadership of the Ulster Unionist Party the first time, you compared unionism to a frog, sitting in a pot of water, unaware of the threat to its existence as the temperature rises. Really damning statement. Arguably that temperature has risen further since 2017. Electorally, Sinn Féin is now the largest party at Westminster, and at that latest election, they pushed the once marginal seats of North Belfast and Fermanagh South Tyrone beyond unionist reach. If that was your view of unionism in 2017, what makes you think that you are going to prevent its decline now?
So what I'm saying, that frog story, which is Charles Handy, the business guru, is about realising that the environment around you is changing, and if it changes really slowly, that's when you don't necessarily realise it. So, as a parent, you see your child every day, and so you don't really realise the growth as compared to, say, you have an aunt who sees the child when it's born and then doesn't see it for 6 months. That aunt will go, oh my goodness, it's growing, because they see the change. If you're living it on a daily basis, you don't necessarily take on board that your environment is changing in a way that's an existential threat. So that's the whole story of you put the frog in cold water and you really, 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 really slowly bring it up to the boil. The frog doesn't realise until it's too late. So I think that's a reasonable analogy in terms of some of the demographic changes that are happening in Northern Ireland, which are reflected in in Sinn Féin winning 3 in a row because they're now the biggest party in local government, the Assembly and Westminster. And if you read the schedules to the Northern Ireland Act of 1998, which is the legislative effect to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, all it says about a border poll is that it can be called by the Secretary of State if he believes the majority voting in a poll are likely to vote for a constitutional change. So there's no schedule that says the evidence he must use is A, B, or C. So of course if I was Sinn Féin, I'd be going, well, do you want evidence? We've won 3 elections in a row. How many do we have to win before we can have our border poll? So what are unionists doing to try and counteract that? And I think what unionists need to realise is, come a border poll, there are a lot of people who will vote to remain in the United Kingdom and are therefore constitutional unionists who don't vote for the LCU's party, who don't vote for the Democratic Unionist Party, who don't vote for the TUP, who don't vote for any political unionist party. And we've got to ask ourselves why. What is it that's making us unattractive, or what is it that would make us attractive to people?
And what is that, in your view, then? I mean, as a leader of one of the main unionist parties, you know, that's bound to be a debate happening behind closed doors.
Yeah, well, in my view, it's a prosperity agenda, as I call it. So I look, for example, at the economy, which is going okay. The rates of employment are very, very low, and that's a big tick. But what we sometimes aren't so keen to talk about is the rates of economic inactivity, which are people of working age neither in work nor looking for work. And over a quarter of that working age population is economically inactive. It's 26.7%. So these are people who are waking up with no sense of purpose in their lives, no reason to get out of bed. They're not living a fulfilled life. I take the view that, you know, if you're getting out of bed with a sense of purpose in your life, if you're earning good money, being well educated or having your children well educated, you're having access to really first-class public services, health absolutely, but not just health, you know, education, transport, the rest. That there's no bias in your life. I'm not saying there aren't obstacles, but the obstacles or the hurdles you have to jump are no higher than the next man or woman. Then you're going to be pretty content with your lot. So under those circumstances, who's going to throw that all up in the air for the uncertainty of constitutional change? People are much more likely to say, tell you what, just give me more of the same. I'm happy enough. And I can drive over the border, or I can get the train down to the rugby at the Aviva, or I can go to Croke Park, or I can do whatever I want. And it becomes, constitutional change becomes meaningless. But the biggest incentive, I think, and what put constitutional change back on the political table, and it had been removed, by the way, in 1998 by and large, and certainly from 2011, when I was first elected, to 2016, I don't remember any debates about constitutional change up the store. And then along came Brexit. And I spoke to a couple of really nice guys the day of the Brexit result, and they said, there were 30-something people, and there were 2 businessmen, and they said, look, we would, what you would probably call a soft nationalist. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, if somebody asked us, would we like to see the United Ireland one day, we would say yes, absolutely would. But if the second question was, would you like to sign up to be an activist to make it happen? They would, oh, no, sorry, too busy. Too busy earning good money and having the children well educated. That was until yesterday. But now that Brexit's happened, where do we sign? Because their sense of identity was being Irish and European. Exactly the same as everybody in the Republic of Ireland. And there was the bond. And if you read the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, it says we define our own identity, and only we do. Now the agreement says British or Irish or both. I happen to think it's a bit more complicated than that, because I consider myself to be Northern Irish, British, Irish and European. But that's just an aside. So what they felt happened in the Brexit vote was English nationalists came in over their heads and did exactly what the Belfast Good Friday Agreement said could never happen. They had their identity altered by somebody else. And there's a famous Ulster poet called John Hewitt, who was the man who said, I'm an Ulsterman, but I'm also British, Irish and European. And they then defined why that was important. He said, if you deny me any part of that mix, you diminish who I am. So those two business guys that day felt diminished. And a lot of people who were relatively comfortable having the aspiration of the United Ireland without wishing to be an activist were so disturbed by what happened with that Brexit that they are now within that active cell of people looking for it.
Do you believe then, in that case, that your party had, a strong voice for Remain around the time of that referendum? Do you think your party could have taken a stronger stance to engage with those feelings of, disillusionment from leaving?
I don't really. When I got the leadership in 2012, I'd only been in the party a year and a half, and I'd been elected less than 12 months, so it was kind of ridiculously quick timeline. But when I got the leadership, some of the elders took me to one side and were sort of telling me about the party, things I didn't know about it. And there were two things they said you must never go near, and one is in or out of the Northern Ireland Executive, and of course it took us out in 2015, and the other one was have a debate about in or out of the European Union. They said you'll just split the party down the middle. But of course, I had to go for the in or out of Europe because David Cameron called the referendum. So our decision-making body is called the Ulster Unionist Executive. And there's roughly 100 people, and they represent all the constituencies and all the elected reps and the lords and the Women's Council and the Young Unionists. And we met up at the Hilton Temple Patrick one Saturday morning. And there was a lot of nervousness about it because I wanted to promote Remain. And they felt they get a lot of blowback, particularly from the country, about getting out. And I made my case, and part of the case was to put up a big map of the UK, a political map. So all the kind of Conservative seats were blue, and the Labour ones were red, and then there were just a few wee ones up in the northwest, which was Northern Ireland. And I said, do you really think if David Cameron takes us out of Europe and frees up all that money, that it's going to come here to us, that we're going to get a better deal than his MPs are going to get for their constituents? And the vote was 99-1 for Remain. And those elders were coming up to me afterwards and said, I don't know how you did that. That's amazing. So I think that was as strong as we could get it, but individuals still were reserving the right to vote as they saw fit. But I think only one went really public. One important person went really public to say they were going to vote Remain, and I would leave, and that was a little disappointing. But I think to get the Ulster Unionists into that Remain position actually was a self-praise, no recommendation, but it was hard done.
After those council election results in 2023, which handed Sinn Féin victory as the biggest party, you said you could envisage two new unionist parties.
Realignment.
About realignment, of course.
Yeah.
You said that's not required. To bring you back to your party's Westminster victory in South Antrim, which took the seat from another unionist party, is it now time to accept that the UP really sort of splinters votes from a unionist pool that's finding itself, in increasing difficulty with the temperature rising?
No, I don't, because we're the original party, so if anybody did the splitting, it was the UP.
But I mean, if we're looking demographically at seat count, that's one unionist seat traded in for another. Is that, on a wider basis, is that helpful? Well, again, or could there have been sort of a deal done to...
Well, let me take you back to 2015, because that was the only Westminster election where I was party leader. And we didn't have any MPs, and for a party that had been around since 1905 and had the majority of MPs for Northern Ireland for most of that time, to have none was really was embarrassing. If you get two MPs, by the way, you become a party at Westminster, and if you're a party at Westminster, then you get big bucks, like six-figure sum, for policy development, which means you're employing staff, which means you're growing, and and you get momentum. So there was a lot of pressure on me to at least get assembly back into Westminster. So I looked at the 18 seats, and there were two I thought we could win. One was South Antrim, which was a DUP seat. The other was Upper Bann, which was a DUP seat. So we put just all our resource into those two seats, attacking the DUP. But I also went to the DUP and said, see Fermanagh South Tyrone, where Sinn Féin have the seat. I think if we had, and I didn't say a single candidate, like pick a single candidate, I said, if Tom Elliott was the single candidate, I think he uniquely, amongst the human race of 8 billion people, can win this seat. And for the first time in modern history, a unionist can take a seat off a Sinn Féin sitting MP. And it took 6 months to persuade Peter Robinson, but we persuaded him. So here you had a situation where Danny Kinahan is trying to knock 7 bells out of a sitting DUP MP in South Antrim. Joanne Dobson is trying to do the same to a sitting DUP MP in Upper Bann. But in Fermanagh South Tyrone, Lord Morrow, the chairman of the DUP, and Arlene Foster, the forthcoming leader of the DUP, are knocking doors and handing out Ulster Unionist branded leaflets saying, will you please vote for Tom Elliott? It's the ultimate mixed message. But actually, you can do things for the Ulster Unionist Party or for the DUP, and then you can do things for unionism more broadly, and that's how it turned out. Joanne didn't get to win, but Danny got the seat for us, Tom got the seat for unionism. And I think that's something I would want to explore, not necessarily for Fermanagh, because I think, as you said, it's probably gone to unionism. But is there even a minor realignment where we could do something that's good for the Ulster Unionist Party, something that's good for the DUP, but something that's also good for unionism? Because Tom won that seat sort of Thursday night, Friday morning. On the Saturday, he was in some sort of loyal order parade through Belfast. And he said the reaction on the streets when people saw him was just phenomenal. And he went into, I don't know if anybody knows, the Welders Club in East Belfast. So, yeah. So he went into the Welders Club, apparently it was bunged, and the guy who was with said, oh, we'll go across the road somewhere else. And then, because like it was 60 to get a drink at the bar, and then somebody spotted Tom, and next thing, like the roof was off, and he said, next thing I knew, I had a pint in each hand. Because they were just so pleased to see that result.
What would that realignment look like? Two new parties, would it be? I know there's a lot of chat around, Conservative and Liberal. Is the Ulster Unionist Party, as it currently stands, is it trying to marry together sort of that Fermanagh unionism and more Belfast Liberal? Is that a problem?
Well, yeah, we've always been that, and we've always been called a broad church in that we would...
Is it broader now than ever, though, considering Doug Beattie's pitch at a new socially liberal party almost, has that increased the temperature?
No, I don't know, and I think Doug was effectively, and he would say this, he was following the kind of trend that I was trying to set. But if you want to go back to, Terence O'Neill was brought down by people like Ian Paisley. So you've always had that. So within my party, within the Ulster Unionist Party, so you've got that broad church, and it's to some extent an east-west split in terms of west of the Bann being a bit more conservative, east of the Bann being a bit more progressive. But then, if you look at the modern history of the DUP, so when I was a broadcast journalist, there were many times when we knew for sure there was a split in the DUP, that they were shouting at each other behind a closed door. Not once in, say, 13 years at UTV, not once could we get a member of the DUP in front of a microphone talking about, admitting that there was a row going on. And yet the night Edwin Poots was elected as leader of the DUP over at the Crown Plaza in South Belfast, they were literally queuing up to get in front of the camera. So there's the same kind of progressive sort of liberal versus more traditional spectrum in the DUP. Which means if you're a leader of either of those parties, you may think, this is what I want to do on X, Y, or Z policy. But then you're looking over your shoulder and saying, well, if I go public and say, this is what I think we should do, there's going to be those boys over there and those girls over there who are going to know, we don't support it. So if you want to be more coherent and cohesive as a party, why wouldn't you get all the progressives into one group and all the more traditionalists into another group? And that might be a kind of son of TUV. And you would be making it bigger to begin with. But all the research I've seen says young people like yourselves are by and large not attracted to that TUV type vote. So over time, it would shrink and wither of the vine. And you could actually get as close as you're ever going to get to a single party over a period of maybe 25 years.
So the UUP, though, as it currently stands, playing the same role as the TUV in splintering votes off a main unionist party, you know, when you look at that victory in Southampton.
I absolutely don't accept that there is a main unionist party. They're the lead
biggest
party.
Unionist party.
Yeah, the lead party of unionists at the moment. Now they were against the 1998 Belfast Good Friday Agreement. They became the largest party in 2003. They agreed to lower the number of MLAs by 18, from 6 per constituency to 5 per constituency. 16 of the 18 who lost their seats were unionists. They agreed to the way local government was reconfigured from 26 councils to 11. And the boundaries that they signed up to, for example, means there will never be a unionist majority in this capital city ever again. They supported Brexit, which I've already told you what I think about that in terms of its impact on our place in the Union. Every time there's a major strategic decision to be made, the DUP, to my mind, demonstrably get it wrong. So why should we...
They're still the largest unionist party, so obviously their voters don't think they're getting it wrong. So, you know, what can your party actually add to that debate then? If the vast majority of unionist voters vote for not, you know, the DUP?
We will remember it took the DUP 40 years to become the largest party of unionists. So I would encourage my people who think the way I do to just be patient. Keep offering the critique. Keep offering the alternative.
And what is that strong alternative within unionism that you're offering? What are kind of the main, what's the way your party sets itself
apart? It's the prosperity agenda.
Even though you're critiquing the NHS in its current state and the funding you get, you know, is that playing into that?
No, it's trying to improve all the services. I said when I took the job, what I want to achieve is better outcomes. You can do that. You don't need money to deliver everything. You know, money isn't everything. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Money is incredibly important, but it doesn't mean you can't deliver some better outcomes just by reorganising, being more efficient, being more productive. So, for example, we put the trusts on notice last summer, end of last summer. We give them a budget every year, and we agree what they're going to do for that budget. So we commission services. And you know, one service that you can't plan is emergency surgery, because you can't say there are going to be, this month there will be 5 major road traffic collisions and 30 people will be in life-threatening conditions. But you can plan planned surgery. So we looked at what they were delivering, and they weren't doing what they promised, what we contracted them to do. So I sat down with the chief executives and I said, let me put it this way, simply. If you order 10 items off Amazon and 7 arrive, how many are you going to pay for? Because we are paying you to do 10 elective surgery lists, but you're only delivering 7. So we put them on notice, and a few months later we took a couple of £1 million back off them because they didn't deliver full 10. So you can use that then to attack waiting lists or to do something else, which takes a little bite, just a little bite, out of the reform agenda.
Okay, just on that topic of sort of broadening unionism's wider appeal, you know, one way it might be argued would be to increase its diversity. And Diana Armstrong, as it stands, as your only female MLA, how do you plan to actually increase the number of women getting involved in your party and actually making it to elected office?
Yeah, that is just a huge challenge, and I remember last time, although it wasn't as bad, it certainly wasn't good. And what I was doing at the time in terms of to grow our elected numbers was I was going to people like Doug Beattie Steve Aiken, Andy Allen. I was going to individual people and saying, look, I would like you to stand, for example, for the Assembly. And so to Steve Aiken, over the course of about 2 years, I persuaded him to stand for the Assembly in South Antrim. I persuaded Doug. It took 3 years to get him to stand in Upper Ban. Andy didn't take quite so long. I was doing the same with women. Not one came back and said yes. I had a few negatives from men who said, I've thought about it, don't want to do it. Not one woman. Now, is it just me? Is it the party? I can't say it's politics, because you look at the number of women on the rise in terms of MLAs up at Stormont, you look at councils. So there are issues that we continue to try and explore.
Yeah, and is that an ongoing conversation? Are there active measures that your party has in place to try and encourage those women in?
So we used to run a programme called the Dame Deirdre Parker programme. She was a minister up at Stormont back in the day. And that was run by somebody who left politics, and I have just persuaded them to come back in. So they're now one of our party officers who are the people who kind of run the day-to-day business of the party. So she will be rolling out that programme again. Diana has shown a great deal of enthusiasm. I've set up a working group in terms of looking at our gender imbalance. There are other groups looking at other imbalances in terms of the diversity of the party.
Right, I'm just going to finish about kind of Northern Ireland and where we're at with the post-sectarian nature of politics. Obviously, the two largest parties are still Sinn Féin and the DUP. So I suppose the electorate is rejecting the more moderate politics. Where do you feel Northern Ireland is at with that vision, and where do you see it going in the future?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I think there's no viable alternative to devolution.
Does that take those extremes to work together then in that case?
But actually what gives me a bit of optimism is this. In the old days, Sinn Féin had a narrative that Northern Ireland was a failed, ungovernable state. And I don't agree with it, but I get why they were saying that. But now that they feel the wind is in their sails and that a border poll is not only inevitable but potentially coming relatively soon, which I don't necessarily agree with either, but that's their analysis. They are very disappointed they're not the lead party of government at Dáil Éireann, in the other jurisdiction, in the Government of Ireland. They are the lead party government here. They know to achieve their aim in terms of becoming the lead party of the government in the Republic of Ireland, they have to make this place work. They have to show that they can govern in a responsible and positive way. And if Unionists want Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom, we have to make this place work. And not just for the traditional Unionist base, because that base is no longer big enough to command a majority in the border poll. So we have to convince, particularly the kind of alliance middle ground vote, that we can make Northern Ireland work, that Northern Ireland is working, to get back to that prosperity agenda. Why risk the uncertainty of change when I'm really enjoying life and my family's doing well? So actually, whatever your constitutional preference, we've suddenly come to the same conclusion: we need to make this place work.
We'll leave it on that note then. Is it the Q&A next term? Any questions then, far away, and I'll go on. Well, we'll go to Dartmouth first, why not?
Presidential privilege.
Yeah, so.
Collins and Collins ran for the Ulster Unionists in North Down in the Westminster election in what can really be described as a bit of a car crash campaign. His post-election interview after getting defeated, he talked about how people in Northern Ireland weren't interested in international affairs. He, in pre-election interviews, he talked about how people in Northern, if you took away disability living allowance, people in Northern Ireland would get straight back to work and the union would be saved by about 85 to 90%. Then prior to becoming leader, Doug Beattie made largely comments I can't repeat in the civilised environment about women, travellers, gay people. There have been even if you go back 20 years or so, now Lord Elliott, whenever he was leader, I think he referred to the scum of Sinn Féin. You look at a party who, even in my lifetime, you can go even further back and find much worse, I'm sure. Constantly, whether it's leaders, whether it's party candidates, seem to make these mad comments, wholly inappropriate. Does the Ulster Unionist Party have a problem with vetting candidates? Because you didn't seem to see, like, especially with Tim Collins. I mean, a lot of his commentaries simply ludicrous during the campaign. Is there a problem with vetting candidates? Like, was this huge campaign about how great Tim Collins was, and yet when it came to it, every time he was put in front of the camera, it was an absolute disaster. Is the Ulster Unionist Party struggling to get people who can actually possibly deliver for Northern Ireland, or can be trusted in front of a microphone?
Yeah, I'm not going to criticise individual leaders. I can tell you what, my previous time as leader, I was very cautious about saying to the staff, check the social media, go all the way back, see if there's anything that, before we go public with this, and sitting down with them and saying things. I mean, had I had the opportunity, I would probably have said to Tim, when you go knocking a door looking for a vote, people don't care whether you're standing for council who do bins and burials, standing for the assembly that does education and health, standing for Westminster that does defence and tax. If they've got a problem, like there's a pothole down the end of the road, they want to know what you're going to do to fix it. Doesn't matter if you're a councillor, MLA, MP, you're going to get that fixed for. And that message obviously didn't get through to Tim. And yes, I mean, I watched the post-election account interview live from the BBC TV studios with Mark Carruthers smiling at me like, you're dead. You're going to have to defend this. So, you know, in theory, Tim should have been a really, really good candidate. If I had any kind of concern, it was there'd been such a gulf from such amount of time had passed since the Gulf War, where his profile was so positive and so high that would young people really get it? But you know, his constituency had the likes of Cotrau, you know, very, very rich kind of affluent area. And then in some of the more working class areas in Bangor, like the Rathcoole Estate, there'd be a huge number of vets, huge number of veterans in there. And so I was puzzled that he didn't, you know, click with both. But it just didn't happen. But yeah, when you go for public life, you're all in. You're going to be examined to the nth degree. It can be a very lonely place, and just the wrong tone or the wrong phrasing. You know, you might know what you think you meant by what you said, but often, you know, English is such a beautiful language and complex. And, you know what you're saying, but somebody else has found another meaning, and bang, there you go, you're done.
Yeah, the white top, yeah.
Hi, Minister. Last year, I finished my placement in Health and Social Care House for procurement. So I have some question about the money in the money management in the Health and Social Care. As this year, the new Procurement Act is coming, and the tender project object is from the most economic advantage tender to the most advantage tender. And the social value part plays a very important role in here. So, and you said you're very comfortable in the economy. So if you think the social value can mitigate the financial problem by using the outside company's power for the house and city.
Yeah, I really believe in the social value, and that should be legislated for and will be legislated for. Between Stormont and local government, we procure about £3 billion just of services per annum, and we have allowed ourselves to knock out local suppliers. More importantly, if we're like, for example, building a hospital, there have been procurement lessons or processes where, for example, we've said an essential is prior experience of building a hospital. You suddenly knocked out the entire local construction industry. So, you do two things. I think you break it down and into manageable bits that fit our economy and our operators, so they can say, yeah, we can do that. Yeah. And then that social value is brilliant. There's a really good all-party group up at Stormont on social enterprise. Claire Dickson, the East Antrim MLA for the Alliance Party, is now consulting on a private members bill on social value. Within health, we could not survive without voluntary community and social enterprise organisations delivering services. And they do it in a way where their local knowledge, the statutory services simply couldn't match. And again, when I was a victims commissioner, a lot of the services we provided to victims and survivors came through voluntary community sectors, because they were in the community and they knew whose door to knock to say, look, you've a problem, we know you lost your brother, can we help you, sort of thing. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, at the back there.
Hi, I have two questions, if that's okay. First one's on your role as health minister, and the second one's on just related to your role as the leader of the party. In terms of your commitments to reforming healthcare services that are in crisis, one of those is the gender identity service in Northern Ireland, which essentially collapsed about 7 years ago. And a lot of trans young people and adults have been on wait lists since then. I think they're only seeing patients from like 2017 now. So what are your plans to restart and support that service? That's my first question. And the second question is relating to two of your members put forward a motion on transgender prisoners 2 weeks ago. This also relates to ludicrous comments by UP party members. And they tried to get this motion to pass, made some used inappropriate language and transphobic and misogynistic language in assembly processes. And so I'm wondering how are you addressing the transphobic rhetoric that's being increasingly adopted by your party members? Is that what your party wants?
Okay, well, I'll take the second one first. I was aware of the debate. I wasn't part of the debate. I haven't even read the transcript, the Hansard of the debate. I know that Doug Beattie feels very passionately about that, and also about segregating paramilitary prisoners. So he has very set views on prisons. I believe he is personally supportive of the LGBTQI community and has good relations with them. But if you're saying I need to look at some of the language that was used, I'll certainly review that Hansard, try and do it at the weekend. In terms of the gender identity services, it collapsed, as you say, some years ago. And it should not have collapsed. And because we now have this indefinite ban on puberty blockers, there is all the more need to have that service. So as of the end of last week, I have signed off, it's in the region of 800 to 850,000 pounds to reboot the gender identity service. And the only remaining issue is going to be workforce, because again, you can't necessarily click your fingers and populate that service with all the right people, with the right skills, the right training, and the right commitment. But at least it is on its way back. And it should not have been allowed to just collapse. Because sometimes, when you have a service and you're told the waiting list is 7 years, what's the point of having the service? What's the point of saying to somebody, if you read about the service, it reads, oh, it's brilliant, it's just what I need. Can I have a bit of it, please? Yeah, in 2035. It's cruel. So yeah, there's the guts of £1 million that has been found and has been ring-fenced to get it up and going again.
Yeah.
Minister, there's a general consensus, if we look at certain parties in politics in Northern Ireland,
that there is a lack of figures with serious calibre and capabilities sometimes. And some could argue that that might be possibly in the UUP as well. What are your thoughts on that, considering in the most recent election, you, a previous leader, and I commend you for coming forward, but you were the only candidate to put their name forward. Do you think that shows there's a lack of interest and a lack of capability and talent in the Ulster Unionist Party?
I understand why you're making that connection. I actually don't think that is the case. And I always make the point that I don't wash the party's dirty linen in public. So, you know, there are people who I think would make good leaders. I did not want to go for the leadership, frankly, because the health portfolio is all consuming. And if I analyse, I've been in the leadership now for a few months. Am I doing everything I should be doing? No. But what I said was, as the minister, there's a lot you can't delegate. So, like, I've got a briefcase full of papers that need signed off tonight, need to be actioned at 8 o'clock in the morning. With the party leadership, you can delegate. You can't say to people, you look after gender, you look after that, you look after the other. But I was really surprised that nobody else came forward looking for the leadership. And all I would say is, when Tom Elliott is pushing you to go back into the leadership, do not say, well, I'll tell you what, Tom, if I'm the last man standing, I'll do it. Because suddenly you find you're the last man standing. But there are some talented people in the party. Do they push themselves enough, or do they get enough profile is another thing. Because often you hear from kind of the membership of the party, you're not making enough noise in the media. And that's true. But that doesn't equate to we're not putting out news releases. We're putting out the news releases, but the media naturally are going, well, we'd rather interview the DUP or the Sinn Féin person. But in terms of the talent, it's not bad. And, you know, but I'm not going to go into detail, but if you look at some of the bigger parties and you analyse who all's representing them, they're not all saying, oh, well, again, self-praise, no recommendation. They're not maybe of ministerial calibre or whatever, you know. So, but that's an interesting point.
Thank you for your answer.
Let's go to Tom then.
Thanks, Minister. Earlier on, you had said that you're not bringing forward a women's health strategy on account of the fact that there isn't adequate funding to go with it, which is fair enough. In the draft programme for government, one of the 9 priorities for the executive is cutting health waiting lists.
Yeah.
And yet it says in the preamble to that priority, with the funding available, we cannot cut health waiting lists.
Yeah.
Why is it there in that case? And hopefully in soon upcoming final PFG, will we see a targeted, costed plan to cut waiting lists? And when can we start to see a difference in what are the longest waiting lists in the UK?
Yeah. Well, that is the question I have asked. Why is it there? And I said to the executive, if there's no money for waiting lists, would it not be more honest to take it off the list of priorities? So we shall see. I don't want it off the list of priorities. I would much rather we had the money to actually reduce the waiting list. But we do strange things. It's hardly a day goes past when some MLA doesn't write to me and say, why don't you reintroduce the cross-border reimbursement scheme, which was really, really successful, where people can go across the border into Sláinte care, get their operation, and we did a deal with the Irish government where, you know, we paid our kind of going rate. Because there's no money, we bid for 135 million, I think it was. A great deal of it would have been used for the cross-border reimbursement scheme. There would have been 4,000 procedures this financial year. 4,000 people off waiting lists feeling better because their hip wasn't killing them anymore or whatever. So, yeah, why are we saying it's a priority but it's going to get worse? It just doesn't have any logical sense.
Piggybacking on Tom's, maybe I want to speak to my own experience obviously we talked about the mental health action plan. my own experience in healthcare when I was examined for psychiatric health and everything. I was specifically told by a GP to go private. So how can you trust people working in A&E to stand up for the NHS when they don't believe in it themselves?
Well, I can't comment on specifics, and I'm not doubting that you're saying what your experience was, but that should not be happening. And actually, one of the issues I'm getting, probably, well, too often for my liking, is that people, for whatever reason, are going and getting private healthcare, and it's not working out as planned, and then they're going to their GP and saying, look, I need medication or whatever because I'm still in pain. And actually, if you go off grid, if you go off the National Health Service, the clinicians are under no obligation to help you out. So the advice that is given out is if you're going to go privately, make sure all your pre-procedure and post-procedure is included in your package. You think that was a sign of somebody working in the health service who has no confidence in the health service?
I would say that, and then also, was it maybe a couple of months ago, I still have an NHS GP, as well as a private one. But I was supposed to get a call from the mental health crisis team. I never received a call after they were supposed to give me a call. I don't.
Well, I think you pick any specialty, and demand is outstripping our capacity to meet it really significantly, and that's why you're not getting calls. That's why some waiting lists are years. And I've been in 9 months in post. I'm very much of the conclusion that no amount of efficiency and productivity is going to close that gap. Now, it'll narrow the gap, and every pound we spend on healthcare has to be spent wisely, because if it's wasted in health, it could be spent elsewhere on some of the social determinants of health, like housing, like education. So I'm very harsh, I suppose, with the department and with the trusts. Every penny you spend is important. So I know that the figures are eye-watering, 8.4 billion quid. But when you break that down to every pound, you've got to spend it. You've got to spend it wisely.
And goes Jack then.
Minister, the two people here I meet no secret about my interest in unionism. I'm very good about it, so I hope that we can feel comfortable on that. But I do often question sometimes the direction that unionism is going in, particularly in recent elections. I guess from 2016 onward from Brexit, but particularly 2017, where we did focus, with the exception of Tom, we did focus, and you've mentioned it yourself, where unionists ran against other unionists, and that's where most of their effort went into. We saw it again. We've now seen Ronald Swan and Jim Allister both in the House of Commons, and I think it adds an excellent diversity to unionism. But I would love to have seen them in on top of retaining the existing number of unionists that we have there, because yes, different parties gained and some lost, but unionism overall didn't overly gain. We gained a diversity. I only wish we could extrapolate that further. I'm from North Down. I saw, as Dermot's already pointed out, I saw Colonel Collins, as honourable as he is, but I also saw him as a slight, if you don't mind my saying, so impediment to unionist unity there. When I also saw Alex, who I'm fortunate to have known for a large part of my life as someone, and most will agree, as the vote reflected, as a hard worker in North Down, who most people genuinely do seem to extol the virtues of. And it was a great pity that we couldn't have had a moment of unity there. If it was going to be anywhere, it should have been there. And equally, and if I could just add finally, you could suggest, and anyone could, in 2017, we shouldn't have had someone else running against Lady Sylvia Herman. And I don't see an issue with that. I think unionism is becoming a bit competitive inwardly rather than externally.
Yeah. And again, on that kind of frog in boiling water, the number of seats, particularly for Westminster, where unionism can compete, is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So South Antrim will be one of the few remaining ones where it is safe to have two unionist candidates go in hammer and tongs to win the seat. So I will, can I say this? Yes, I can. I will make it my business to try and reach out to the other unionist parties to say, can we be sensible about the number of candidates we run and where we run them? Because if we're not, we split the vote in a way where no unionist gets the seat, and what's the profit in that? And the other way says, we mentioned Tim Collins. I mean, I should say the Ulster Unionist Party came to me in 2010 and said, look, you've been on UTV for 13 years, your profile is as high as anybody in the country, stand for election, you win a seat. And I stood in Strangford, Newton Ards and the rest, and the DUP, there was no sitting MP because Iris Robinson had resigned. So there was going to be a new MP, so it was either going to be the shiny bloke off the TV. What did the DUP say? We were putting up Jim Shannon, a councillor of 20 years. No competition. Walked it. If you're active on the ground. And then, so I lost my seat, I've lost my job. I was lucky it was only 1 year to the next Assembly election. I spent that 12 months. Every hole in the hedge, every community association, every week in the Arts Chronicle, the newspaper, walking the streets, going to the markets, and then I got it. If you don't do it on the ground, it's not going to happen.
It might be all of time for. What do you think, Dermot? One more. Look at this side. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Would it be more efficient to consolidate like smaller hospitals into larger bed-equipped facilities using savings from closures? And if so, what are the main obstacles?
Can you speak up slightly?
Would it be more efficient to consolidate smaller hospitals into larger bed-equipped facilities to deal with this waiting list and this backlog? And if so, what would be the key obstacles with this? Would it be something to do with like political backlash or
electoral? Yeah.
Electoral consequences?
Okay, well, two things about that, and again, going for the second bit first. Every MLA, all 90, I think if you spoke to them one-on-one, they would say, we have to reform the way we deliver healthcare. Right? And by the way, when Professor Bengoa came back in October, he sat with the First and the Deputy First Minister and me, and he said, if you don't do this, by 2040, which isn't that far away, health will require the entire executive budget. No money for education, no money for road, it's the whole thing, which is kind of stark. But when I say, for example, or the Northern Trust say, we are going to move general emergency surgery from the Causeway Hotel in Coleraine to the Antrim Area Hospital in Antrim, those same MLAs who represent that area say no. When we say we're moving a service from Enniskillen to Londonderry, the boys and girls who represent Enniskillen, they say no. There's still this kind of not in my backyard attitude to that. So what you're suggesting would be politically very difficult. But the broader point is, yeah, consolidate the bigger into the bigger ones and get away with the smaller ones. That would be a huge capital expense. And again, we don't have the money for that. So what we're doing is we're saying, for example, White Abbey is a very small hospital, just north of Belfast, yeah. So it has become a rapid diagnostic centre, and that's basically all it does. And so if somebody feels they've got these vague symptoms and the doctor, the GP is not quite sure what they are, but thinks it might be cancer, for example, you can go to White Abbey, and there's another one, by the way, in Dungannon, in the South Tyrone, and within 2 hours of arriving, you'll have been assessed, you'll have been scanned, and you'll have your results. And if you're lucky, your result is, it's not cancer, away you go. And that's a fantastic service. That's, say, 2 hours. And the waiting list isn't particularly long. And then if you separate out emergency surgery, somebody's been in a road traffic collision or whatever, from planned surgery, you're having your hips done or your knees or whatever, and you do those in 2 different hospitals, then the theatres are used to maximum effect. So you might have been on a waiting list for hip replacement for 3 years, and the day you're to go into hospital to have it done, there's a major road traffic collision on the M1, and suddenly the theatre and the theatre staff and the surgeon and the anaesthetist and the theatre nurse who were going to do your hip, they're saving somebody's life, and you get a phone call to say, don't bother coming in. Or you arrive and they say, very sorry, we'll reschedule it for some other time. So actually we can use the entire health service estate. We can use all the hospitals we've got. So we don't actually need to close them. But that's why I'm encouraging people to think of hospitals as a network. Because most people tend to think of their nearest hospital as the health service. But now we're saying to them, no, what you need may be delivered by a specialist team who aren't at your nearest hospital, they're 20, 30 miles away. And the research we've done says people are prepared to travel to get first-class service. But what they would like is their aftercare as near a home as possible. So they don't want to be travelling week on week for 10 weeks to get their bandages changed or to get re-x-rayed or whatever a long way away. So that's the direction of travel we're following. Folks, I'm going to have to...
Show the home right.
Yeah.
It was very, very brief. Minister, thank you very much for coming to the Society. It's been an absolute pleasure and a really interesting talk. For everyone that's a member of the Society, remember 7 o'clock at the Lanyon Building tomorrow morning, so that's out there for our first charity social of the calendar year. And this Thursday we'll see you for a debate This House Will Not Have Children. So thank you very much for coming. Plenty of us will be going to the parlour afterwards for a pint. So thank you. Thank you.
Do you like that photo?
Sorry. Yeah.